As I buried my 9-year-old alone, my family drank champagne. Then Mom texted, "We're taking over your finances." They wanted my dead son's $1.5 million trust for my sister's lifestyle. The casket was too small. That was the only thought my brain could process as I stood on the frozen grass of the cemetery. It was a bitterly cold Tuesday morning, the kind of day where the sky looks like a bruised sheet of iron and the wind cuts straight through your coat, settling deep into your bones. But the chill in the air was nothing compared to the absolute, suffocating numbness inside my chest. I watched the mechanical pulley system slowly lower the pristine white box into the dark earth. Inside that box was Finn. My sweet, brave, 9-year-old boy. My entire world. I stood there wrapped in a black wool coat that suddenly felt 10 sizes too big, shivering uncontrollably. I didn't have a large support system to begin with, but looking around the empty gravesite, the reality of my isolation was deafening. There were no rows of mourning family members. There was no one holding my hand or offering a shoulder to lean on. The only person standing beside me was Florence, my 72-year-old neighbor. She had a tissue pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. The minister, a kind older man who had met Finn only once in the hospital, read verses from a worn leather book, his voice carrying over the empty expanse of headstones. Where were they? Where was the family that was supposed to surround you in your darkest hour? I knew the answer. My parents, Franklin and Evelyn, and my younger sister, Chelsea, had made their priorities crystal clear weeks ago. Chelsea's engagement party had been on the calendar for 6 months. When Finn's condition suddenly deteriorated, and the doctors gently told me it was time to make arrangements, my mother had actually sighed on the phone. I remember her exact words, "Caroline, you know how much money Chelsea's future in-laws are pouring into this party. We can't just cancel a caterer for 200 people. We will visit the gravesite next weekend, we promise." They couldn't spare 2 hours. Not 2 hours to say goodbye to their only grandson. Not 2 hours to hold their daughter as she buried her child. The minister finished his prayer, bowing his head. The cemetery worker, a young guy looking visibly uncomfortable with the profound emptiness of the gathering, gave me a subtle nod. It was time. I bent down, picking up a handful of loose, damp dirt. My hand shook violently as I tossed it over the edge. It hit the top of the white casket with a hollow, echoing thud that I knew would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. Florence wrapped her frail arm around my waist, her voice thick with emotion. "He is at peace now, Caroline. You did everything a mother could possibly do." I couldn't speak. I just nodded blindly. Then my phone buzzed. It was a sharp, vibrating rhythm against my hip. I had put it on silent, but the physical sensation jolted me out of my trance. A twisted, desperate part of my brain thought, maybe it's them. Maybe they realized what a horrific mistake they made. Maybe they are waiting in the parking lot, too ashamed to walk up. With frozen fingers, I pulled the phone from my pocket. The screen lit up, piercing the gray morning light. It was a text message from my mother. I stared at the words, my breath catching in my throat, freezing into a white plume in the icy air. The message read, "Stop being dramatic and ignoring us. Sign the papers today. We need to take over your finances immediately before you do something stupid." My thumb hovered over the screen. Before I could process the sheer cruelty of her timing, a notification popped up at the top of the screen. It was an Instagram alert. Chelsea had just posted a new photo. Like a glutton for punishment, I tapped it. The image loaded instantly. It was a high-definition, perfectly filtered picture of my family. My father, Franklin, in a tailored tuxedo. My mother, Evelyn, wearing a designer gown, holding a crystal flute. And Chelsea in the center, her diamond ring flashing under the chandeliers of the grand ballroom, her head thrown back in a wide, carefree laugh. They were toasting with champagne. The caption read, "Cheers to forever. Surrounded by the people who matter most." The timestamp said, "Just now." At that exact moment, across town, while I was dropping dirt on my son's coffin, they were drinking champagne. And my mother was texting me, demanding control of my money. The numbness vanished. It didn't turn into sorrow, and it didn't turn into tears. It crystallized into a cold, terrifying clarity. They weren't just absent. They were calculating. They were already making their move for the trust fund. My dead son's $1.5 million trust fund. To understand the absolute audacity of that text message, you have to understand the 18 months that preceded it. Finn's illness didn't strike like a lightning bolt. It crept into our lives like a slow, suffocating fog. It started with mysterious bruises on his shins, fevers that wouldn't break, and a terrifying lethargy that turned my energetic, soccer-loving boy into a ghost of himself. When the pediatric oncologist finally sat me down in a windowless room and diagnosed him with a rare, aggressive blood disorder, my entire reality collapsed. From that day forward, the hospital became our universe. My life was measured in blood draws, chemotherapy cycles, and the relentless, rhythmic beeping of vital sign monitors. I quit my job as a marketing director because the specialized care Finn needed was a 24-hour commitment. I sold my car, relying on the bus and Florence's kindness to get back and forth. I drained my savings account to zero, then maxed out my credit cards, living on lukewarm hospital cafeteria soup and vending machine crackers. I slept in a terrible, vinyl reclining chair next to his bed for over 500 nights. Finn was a warrior. Even when his hair fell out in clumps, even when the nausea made him too weak to speak, he would put on his favorite faded superhero pajamas and give me a weak thumbs up. He was the one comforting me half the time. And where was my family during this nightmare? They were ghosts. My father, Franklin, claimed hospitals depressed him and that his real estate business needed his full attention. Chelsea was too busy planning her dream wedding and going on weekend getaways to Napa Valley. My mother, Evelyn, managed exactly one visit in a year and a half. I remember that visit vividly. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 8 months into Finn's treatment. Evelyn walked into the pediatric oncology ward holding her nose, treating the sterilized air like it was toxic. She didn't bring a toy. She didn't bring a balloon. She brought a Venti iced latte for herself. She stayed for exactly 20 minutes, complaining about the exorbitant cost of the visitor parking garage. During that brief visit, the nurse came in to change Finn's foreline. It was a painful process, and I had to hold Finn's hand, singing softly to distract him. Evelyn, unable to handle the reality of sick children, wandered over to the small makeshift desk in the corner of the room where I kept all our medical bills and paperwork. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was too focused on my son's tears. But when the nurse left and I turned back around, Evelyn was holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. She was reading a letter from Graham, the trust attorney hired by my ex-husband, Donovan. Donovan and I had divorced amicably 5 years ago. He was an investment banker who had moved to London for work. He wasn't a perfect husband, but he was a pragmatic man. When Finn was born, Donovan had immediately set up an ironclad medical and educational trust fund. Over the years, with aggressive investments and a massive life insurance policy Donovan had taken out on himself and rolled into the trust, the value had ballooned to $1.5 million. Evelyn's eyes were wide as she scanned the document. I snatched the letter from her hands, furious. "What are you doing?" I had hissed, keeping my voice low so Finn wouldn't hear. "I didn't realize Donovan was hiding that kind of wealth," my mother whispered back, her tone completely devoid of any concern for the sick child in the bed behind her. "Caroline, do you know how much money this is? This could solve all of our problems. Your father's business is." She stopped herself, clearing her throat. "Well, it's good to know Finn is provided for." She left 5 minutes later. She never came back. But the seed had been planted. In her mind, that money wasn't a safety net for a dying child. It was a lottery ticket waiting to be cashed. For the next 10 months, I fought alone. I watched my son slowly fade away. I held him as he took his last breath, my heart shattering into a million jagged pieces. I walked out of that hospital with an empty car seat and a soul so hollow I felt like I was floating. And now, standing at his fresh grave, staring at a picture of them drinking champagne, the pieces of their sick puzzle finally snapped together. They hadn't abandoned us because they were busy. They had abandoned us because they were waiting. The morning after the funeral, The silence of my small rental house was deafening. There were no nurses knocking on the door, no monitors beeping, no soft cartoons playing on the iPad. There was just me, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills that seemed to mock my existence. I needed to finalize the payment for the funeral home. The director had been incredibly gracious, allowing me to proceed with the service on a good faith deposit, but the remaining balance of $4,200 was due by the end of the week. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The screen loaded, displaying the cruel reality of my situation. My personal checking account balance was negative $38.50. My savings account had exactly $12 in it. I had $20 in my wallet. That was the sum total of my liquid assets after 18 months of fighting for my son's life. It was a sick, twisted irony. On paper, I was the sole residual beneficiary of a trust fund worth $1.5 million. In reality, I couldn't afford to buy a week's worth of groceries, let alone pay for the box I had just buried my son in. The trust fund was currently locked in a transition phase. Because Finn was a minor, the legal process of transferring the assets to my name after his passing required death certificates, probate filings, and a mountain of bureaucratic red tape. Graham, the attorney, had told me it would take at least 30 to 60 days for the funds to be fully released. I closed the laptop, a heavy sigh escaping my lips. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten anything substantial in 2 days. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and made a cup of instant coffee. As the water boiled, I thought about my mother's text message from yesterday. Sign the papers today. We need to take over your finances immediately before you do something stupid. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew I was broke. They knew I was vulnerable, grieving, and exhausted. They thought I was a wounded animal they could easily corner. If they could get me to sign a power of attorney or some form of financial guardianship, they could intercept the trust fund the second it cleared probate. But what did they need it for so desperately? Chelsea's wedding was expensive, sure, but my parents had always projected an image of upper-middle-class wealth. They drove luxury cars, lived in a sprawling suburban house, and threw lavish parties. Why this sudden, aggressive desperation to rob a grieving mother? I needed answers. And I knew there was only one way to get them. I couldn't ignore them anymore. I had to walk right into the lion's den. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked like a ghost. I had dark, purple bags under my eyes, my cheekbones were sharp from weight loss, and my hair was a tangled mess. I looked exactly like the unstable, broken woman they were counting on me to be. I brushed my hair, threw on a pair of clean jeans and a plain black sweater. I grabbed my car keys, well, Florence's spare car keys, since she had insisted I borrow her old sedan while I sorted my life out. As I walked out the front door, Florence was watering her hydrangeas on the porch next door. She stopped, leaning on her watering can, her sharp blue eyes scanning my face. "You're going to see them, aren't you?" she asked, her voice lined with worry. "I have to, Florence," I replied, my voice raspy but steady. "I have to know what kind of trap they're setting." Florence set the watering can down and walked over to the low fence separating our yards. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Caroline, listen to me," she said, her tone fierce. "Grief makes people do one of two things. It either breaks them completely, or it burns away all the nonsense and leaves behind pure steel. Don't let those people break you. You are Finn's mother. You fight for his memory the same way you fought for his life." I looked at this elderly woman who had done more for me in a year than my own blood relatives had done in a lifetime. A small, hardened knot formed in the center of my chest. "I'm not going to break," I told her. And for the first time since Finn died, I truly believed it. I got into the car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway, heading toward the affluent suburbs where my parents lived. It was time to find out exactly how deep their betrayal went. The drive took 40 minutes, winding away from my modest neighborhood into the sprawling, manicured lawns of Oak Creek Estates. Every house here looked like a magazine cover, boasting perfectly trimmed hedges and aggressive displays of wealth. I pulled Florence's beat-up sedan into my parents' wide, sweeping driveway, parking right behind Chelsea's brand-new Range Rover. Before my finger even left the doorbell, the heavy oak door swung open. My mother stood there, wearing a cashmere cardigan and a look of heavily manufactured sympathy. "Oh, Caroline, darling," Evelyn cooed, reaching out to pull me into a stiff hug that smelled of expensive perfume and cheap lies. "We've been so worried about you. Come in, come in." I stepped into the grand foyer, keeping my arms rigid at my sides. The house was immaculate, silent, and cold. Evelyn led me into the formal dining room. The moment I crossed the threshold, I realized this wasn't a family visit. It was an intervention. Or rather, an ambush. Sitting around the massive mahogany dining table were my father, Franklin, my sister, Chelsea, and, to my absolute shock, Brittany. Brittany had been my best friend since college. She was my maid of honor when I married Donovan. When Finn first got sick, she used to bring me coffee at the hospital. But over the last 6 months, her visits had stopped entirely. She had stopped returning my calls, claiming she was overwhelmed with work. Yet here she was, sitting at my parents' table, sipping sparkling water as if she belonged to their inner circle. "Have a seat, kiddo," Franklin said, using a patronizing nickname I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. I remained standing. "What is this? Why is Brittany here?" Brittany looked down at her manicured nails, avoiding eye contact. "I'm here because I care about you, Caroline. We all do. We're a team." "A team," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "A team that couldn't make it to the cemetery yesterday." Chelsea rolled her eyes, letting out a dramatic sigh. "Oh my God, Caroline, please stop playing the victim. We explained the situation with the caterers. You're just deflecting because you know you're not in your right mind right now." Franklin leaned forward, folding his hands over a thick stack of legal documents resting on the table. "Chelsea is right. The loss of a child is unimaginable. It breaks the mind. We've spoken to some specialists, Caroline. Given your current financial destitution and your emotional fragility, it is highly irresponsible for you to handle any large sums of money or make major life decisions right now." He slid the stack of papers across the polished wood toward me. I looked down. It was a comprehensive financial power of attorney and a voluntary guardianship agreement. If I signed it, I would be legally handing over every cent to my father's absolute control. "We are just trying to protect you from yourself," Evelyn added softly, placing a hand on my arm. I flinched, stepping back. "Protect me?" I scoffed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You want to protect the trust fund. That's what this is about." "Don't be vulgar," Franklin snapped, his facade of concern slipping for a second to reveal the shark underneath. "You have no income. You have debt. That money needs to be managed by someone with financial literacy. I will invest it, grow it, and give you an allowance so you can focus on healing." As he spoke, my eyes drifted from the legal documents to the edge of the table. Peeking out from underneath Franklin's leather portfolio was a large, rolled-up sheet of paper. The edge had flattened out just enough for me to see the detailed architectural lines and the stamp of a high-end design firm. I reached out and yanked the paper out from under his portfolio before he could stop me. I unrolled it flat on the table. It was a set of blueprints. The title block read, "Proposed Renovations and Pool Addition, Chelsea and Mark's Marital Estate." The estimated construction budget printed at the bottom was $1.2 million. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked from the blueprints to Chelsea, whose face had gone completely pale, and then to my father. "An allowance," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want to put me on an allowance, while you use my dead son's money to build your golden child a luxury swimming pool. That is an investment property," Franklin shouted, standing up abruptly. "It builds equity for the whole family. You don't understand how wealth management works, Caroline, which is exactly why you need to sign those papers." I dropped the blueprints on the table. "I'm not signing anything. If you ever contact me about this money again, I will call the police." I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, Chelsea yelled out, her voice shrill and desperate. "You think you can just walk away? You're broke, Caroline. You're crazy, and we can prove it. We will see you in court. I slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing through the neighborhood. The drive back to my neighborhood was a blur of adrenaline and sickening realizations. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The air in the car felt too thin to breathe. I rolled down the window, letting the freezing wind whip against my face, trying to cool the burning rage in my chest. Chelsea's shrill threat echoed in my ears. We will see you in court. It wasn't an empty threat. My parents weren't just greedy, they were desperate. Seeing those blueprints explained everything. My father's real estate development company had been rumored to be struggling for years. He always played the part of the wealthy tycoon, but it was all leveraged on debt. Chelsea's fiancé, Mark, came from old, established money. My parents were terrified of looking inferior to Mark's family. They had promised Chelsea a multi-million-dollar marital estate to save face, and they didn't have the cash to back it up. Until Finn died. To them, my son's tragedy was a financial miracle. It was a $1.5 million bailout. But it wasn't just the money that made me sick to my stomach. It was the lifelong dynamic that had brought us to this exact moment. Growing up, the roles in our house were strictly defined. Chelsea was the golden child. She was beautiful, charismatic, and ruthlessly selfish. Whatever Chelsea wanted, Chelsea got. A new car for her 16th birthday, a fully funded European vacation for graduation, the down payment for her first condo. I was the scapegoat. I was the quiet one, the pragmatic one, the one who worked through college to pay my own tuition. Every time I achieved something, it was minimized. Every time I stumbled, it was magnified. When I married Donovan, my parents were thrilled, not because they liked him, but because he was wealthy. When we divorced, they blamed me entirely, telling me I had ruined my one chance at a good life. They had spent 34 years conditioning me to believe I was incompetent, unstable, and a burden. They expected me to just roll over and hand them the keys to my survival because that's what I had always done to keep the peace. But what shattered my heart more than my parents' predictable cruelty was seeing Brittany sitting at that table. Why was she there? Why had my best friend of 15 years suddenly switched sides? As I sat at a red light, staring blankly at the taillights in front of me, the missing puzzle piece slid into place. Mark, Chelsea's fiancé, was a senior partner at a massive corporate law firm downtown. Just last month, before she stopped returning my calls, Brittany had complained about her dead-end job in human resources and mentioned she had an interview for a highly lucrative executive director position at a corporate firm. Mark's firm. Chelsea had bought my best friend. They had dangled a six-figure salary and a ticket into their elite social circle in front of Brittany, and all she had to do in return was abandon a grieving mother and nod along when they called me crazy. Everyone had a price. Brittany's price was a corner office. A single tear tracked down my cheek, but I wiped it away furiously. Crying was a luxury I could no longer afford. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But I was fighting a wealthy, connected family with nothing but $20 and a borrowed car. I needed armor. I needed a shield. I pulled my car over into a strip mall parking lot and dug through my purse, pulling out the crumpled business card I had kept ever since the day Evelyn snooped through my paperwork at the hospital. Graham Sterling. Trust and estate attorney. I dialed the number. A receptionist answered on the second ring. Law offices of Graham Sterling. How may I direct your call? My name is Caroline, I said, forcing my voice to project an authority I didn't feel. I am the mother of Finn. I need to see Mr. Sterling immediately. It's an absolute emergency. There was a brief hold, a crackle of elevator music, and then a deep, calm voice came on the line. Caroline. I was terribly sorry to hear about Finn. I've been expecting your call. How soon can you get to downtown? I'm 20 minutes away, I said. I'll clear my schedule. Drive safe. We have a lot to discuss. Graham Sterling's office was located on the 20th floor of a sleek glass building overlooking the city. Walking into the reception area, smelling the rich scent of old paper, polished mahogany, and expensive espresso, I felt acutely aware of my thrift store jeans and exhausted appearance. But Graham didn't look at me with pity or judgment. When he stepped out of his office to greet me, he offered a firm, respectful handshake. He was a man in his late 50s, wearing a sharp suit and a completely unflappable expression. He led me into his office and gestured for me to sit in a plush leather chair. On his desk sat a thick, meticulously organized file folder with Finn's name printed on the tab. "Thank you for seeing me so quickly," I started, wringing my hands in my lap. "I don't know exactly how this works, but my family, my parents, are trying to force me to sign over power of attorney. They threaten to take me to court if I don't give them control of Finn's trust." Graham leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. He didn't look surprised in the slightest. "Caroline, before we get into the legal mechanics, I want to tell you something about your ex-husband," Graham said gently. "Donovan is a complex man, and his career kept him far away, but he was exceptionally protective of his son. When he retained me to structure this trust 5 years ago, he was very explicit about his concerns." "Concerns about what?" I asked. Graham opened the folder. "About your parents. Donovan told me, and I quote, 'My former in-laws view money as a weapon and a right. If anything ever happens to my son, they will descend like vultures to take what isn't theirs, and they will try to crush Caroline to get it.'" I gasped, a hand flying to my mouth. Donovan had known. Even from an ocean away, living his own life in London, he had seen the reality of my family clearer than I ever wanted to admit. Because of that foresight, Graham continued, tapping a thick document inside the folder, "Donovan instructed me to build a fortress around this money. This trust is not a standard boilerplate agreement. It contains multiple fail-safes. The $1.5 million is currently transitioning out of probate, which is standard. But once it clears, you are the sole, uncontested residual beneficiary. There is no board, there is no cosigner, and there is no clause that allows any blood relative of yours to access a single dime." A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. "So they can't touch it, even if they try to sue me for it?" Graham's expression darkened slightly. "Directly? No. They cannot sue the trust. It is ironclad." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "However, there is a loophole they can exploit, and based on what you've told me about their threats, I suspect this is their exact strategy." My heart rate spiked again. "What loophole?" "Guardianship," Graham stated flatly. "If they cannot break the trust, they will try to break you. They will file an emergency petition in family court claiming that your grief has triggered a severe psychiatric breakdown. They will argue that you are a danger to yourself and wholly incompetent to manage your own affairs. If a judge grants them legal guardianship over you, they effectively become you in the eyes of the law. They gain full control of your bank accounts, your assets, and by extension, the trust fund." The room spun. "They can just do that? Just claim I'm crazy and steal my life?" "They can try," Graham corrected. "But the burden of proof is high. They need evidence. They will use your financial distress against you. They will use your isolation against you. They will gather witnesses to testify about your emotional instability. Who do they have in their corner?" The image of Brittany sitting at my parents' dining table flashed in my mind. "My sister. And my best friend. They bought my best friend." Graham nodded slowly, writing something down on his legal pad. "Then we need to prepare for a smear campaign. They want to paint you as a hysterical, broken woman. We need to counter that by proving you are lucid, responsible, and that they are motivated entirely by financial greed." "How do we prove that?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and newly ignited determination. "We need them on the record," Graham said, his eyes locking onto mine. "We need them to admit what they're really after." "Have they texted you anything incriminating?" I handed him my phone, showing him the text from my mother about taking over my finances, alongside the photo of their champagne toast. Graham read it, a grim smile touching his lips. "This is excellent. But we need more. We need to provoke them into saying the quiet part out loud." The plan Graham concocted was risky, but it was our best shot at establishing a documented pattern of harassment and financial coercion. He told me to invite my family to a neutral, public location under the guise of negotiating the paperwork. People are less likely to physically assault you in public, but arrogant people are highly likely to lose their temper and say things they shouldn't if they think they are losing control of the narrative. I chose a bustling, noisy diner on the edge of town, famous for its greasy burgers and terrible coffee. It was the last place my upper-crust family would ever willingly step foot in, which threw them off balance from the start. I arrived 20 minutes early. I sat in a corner booth, sliding my phone into the breast pocket of my jacket, ensuring the voice memo recording app was running and the microphone was unobstructed. 2 booths away, sitting with her back to me, was Florence. She was wearing a large sun hat, quietly eating a slice of cherry pie. She was my silent witness. At exactly 1 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Franklin, Evelyn, and Chelsea walked in. They looked around the diner with open disgust, dodging a waitress carrying a tray of dirty plates. They spotted me and marched over, sliding into the vinyl booth across from me. "I can't believe you dragged us to this health hazard," Chelsea sneered, wiping the table with a napkin before setting her designer purse down. "Let's make this quick," Franklin said, skipping the pleasantries. He didn't even bother to order water. "Have you come to your senses? Did you bring the signed power of attorney?" I looked at the 3 of them. Just a week ago, seeing them would have filled me with a desperate need for their approval. Now, I just felt a profound, clinical disgust. "I didn't bring the papers," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured. "I brought these instead." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I slid out 3 high-resolution, printed photographs and laid them face up on the table. They were screenshots from Chelsea's Instagram. The champagne toast, the dancing, the laughter. Each one clearly showed the timestamp, Tuesday morning, the exact hour I was lowering Finn into the ground. Evelyn's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "What is the meaning of this, Caroline? Are you trying to guilt-trip us?" "I'm trying to understand," I said, leaning forward. "I want to hear you say it. I want you to explain why you couldn't attend your grandson's funeral, but you expect me to hand over his $1.5 million trust fund to build a swimming pool for Chelsea." "Keep your voice down," Franklin hissed, looking around nervously as a few diners at the counter glanced in our direction. "Why?" I asked loudly. "Are you embarrassed?" "You should be. You abandoned my son for 18 months. You didn't visit him. You didn't call him. And now you want his money to pay off your debts." Chelsea slammed her hand on the table, her perfect mask completely shattering. "You don't deserve that money. You're a miserable, broke, unstable loser. You've been a failure your entire life. That money belongs in this family, to people who actually know how to build a future." "Chelsea, stop," Evelyn tried to intervene, but the dam had broken. "No, I won't stop," Chelsea yelled. "She's sitting there acting so high and mighty while Dad is facing bankruptcy because of the market crash. If Mark's family finds out we're broke, they'll call off the wedding. You owe us this, Caroline." I sat perfectly still, letting the recorder in my pocket capture every single word. "I don't owe you anything. Finn's money is legally mine. And you will never see a single cent of it." Franklin leaned across the table. His face was inches from mine, his eyes dark with a violent, unhinged fury I had never seen before. He didn't care who was watching anymore. "Listen to me, you unstable bitch," Franklin snarled, every word dripping with malice. "You are going to give us control of that trust, one way or another. If you don't sign it over willingly, we will drag you into court. We will tell the judge how crazy you are. We have Brittany. We have witnesses. We will take your dignity. We will take your freedom, and we will take everything from you. You will end up locked in a psych ward, and I will be signing the checks anyway." I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. "Try it," I whispered. I grabbed my purse, slid out of the booth, and walked out the front door, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. As I walked to the car, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and hit the stop button on the recording. The trap had worked perfectly. But the war had just begun. Thank you so much for watching. If you are hooked on Caroline's fight for justice, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me which city you are watching from. Every comment helps this video reach more people. Stay tuned, because the courtroom battle is about to begin. For 72 hours after the diner confrontation, my phone was entirely silent. There were no missed calls from my mother, no passive-aggressive text messages from Chelsea, and no legal threats from my father. To anyone else, that silence might have felt like a victory, a sign that they had backed down after realizing I wasn't going to be an easy target. But I had spent 34 years living in the shadow of my family's dysfunction. I knew exactly what that silence meant. It was the terrifying stillness of a tidal wave pulling the ocean back right before it destroys the shoreline. They were regrouping. On Thursday morning, the tidal wave hit. I was sitting in my living room, wearing one of Finn's oversized hoodies that still smelled faintly of his grape-flavored toothpaste, when there was a series of heavy, authoritative knocks at the front door. It wasn't a friendly tap. It was the kind of knock that demanded immediate compliance. I opened the door to find a county sheriff standing on my porch. He was a large man with a perfectly pressed uniform and an expression completely devoid of emotion. He asked for my full legal name. When I confirmed it, he handed me a massive, thick manila envelope that felt impossibly heavy in my hands. He didn't offer any sympathy or explanation. He just tipped his hat, said "You've been served," and walked back to his cruiser. I closed the door and slid down the wood paneling until I was sitting on the floor of the entryway, the cold envelope resting on my knees. My fingers were shaking so violently that I tore the paper trying to get it open. A massive stack of legal documents slid out onto the floor. The cover page was printed with the official seal of the county family court. The bold, black letters at the top read, "Emergency petition for guardianship and conservatorship." The petitioners were listed as Franklin and Evelyn. The respondent was me. I started reading the dense legal jargon, my stomach dropping further and further with every paragraph. They weren't just asking for temporary control of my finances. They were petitioning the court to strip me of my fundamental rights as an adult human being. The document claimed that following the tragic death of my son, I had suffered a catastrophic and debilitating psychiatric break. They requested that the court declare me legally incompetent, grant them full control of my assets, the authority to make my medical decisions, and the right to dictate my living arrangements. They wanted to own me. If a judge signed off on this, I would effectively become a prisoner to my parents. They could put me in a facility. They could force me to sell my rental house. And, most importantly, they would have absolute, unquestioned access to Finn's $1.5 million trust fund the second it cleared probate. Attached to the main petition were 3 sworn affidavits. The first was from my father, detailing a fabricated history of my lifelong struggle with emotional regulation and claiming I was currently destitute and starving myself. The second was from Chelsea, claiming I had violently attacked her at a diner and had to be restrained. But it was the third affidavit that made my vision blur and the air completely leave my lungs. It was signed by Brittany. I stared at Brittany's signature at the bottom of the sworn statement. The ink looked black and sharp, like a knife slicing through 15 years of friendship. I forced myself to read her words, though every sentence felt like a physical blow to the chest. In her affidavit, Brittany claimed she had witnessed severe, escalating mental instability from me during Finn's illness. She painted a picture of a mother who was not just grieving, but dangerously unhinged. She wrote that I frequently suffered from delusions, that I aggressively mistreated the hospital staff, and that I was incapable of maintaining basic personal hygiene. But the most devastating part, the absolute weaponization of my deepest vulnerability, was located in paragraph 4. Brittany swore under penalty of perjury that on a specific date in November, I had confessed to having active and persistent suicidal ideation, and that I had told her I was planning to end my own life to escape the burden of reality. She stated she was supporting this guardianship petition because she genuinely feared I would kill myself if left unsupervised with a large sum of money. I dropped the paper onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest as a dry, agonizing sob ripped from my throat. I remembered that night in November. I remembered it with crystal clarity. Finn had just undergone his second round of experimental bone marrow treatment. His tiny body had rejected it violently. His fever had spiked to 104 degrees. The doctors had rushed him to the pediatric intensive care unit, hooking him up to a terrifying array of machines that breathed for him. I was told to sit in the waiting room because they needed space to work. I was completely broken. I hadn't slept in 3 days. I called Brittany from a payphone in the hospital corridor, sobbing so hard I was choking on my own breath. She drove to the hospital and sat with me on a sterile vinyl couch at 3 in the morning. I rested my head on her shoulder. I told her how tired I was. I told her that watching my baby suffer was tearing my soul apart. I whispered, through my tears, sometimes I just want to fall asleep and never wake up again, just so my chest stops hurting. It was the desperate, exhausted plea of a mother watching her child die. It was a metaphor for emotional exhaustion. It was a private, sacred confession of pain to my best friend. And she had sold it. She had taken my deepest moment of vulnerability, twisted it into a clinical diagnosis of suicidal intent, and handed it to my family on a silver platter so she could get a high-paying job at Chelsea's fiancé's law firm. The psychological violence of that betrayal was paralyzing. For a terrifying moment, sitting on the floor of my entryway, surrounded by their lies, I wondered if they were right. Maybe I was broken. Maybe I was crazy. They had the money, they had the lawyers, they had my best friend. Who was going to believe a broke, grieving mother over a united, wealthy family? A soft knock at the door startled me. I didn't want to answer it, but the door handle rattled, and Florence's voice called out from the porch. "Caroline? The curtains are open. I can see you on the floor. Open this door right now." I crawled over and unlocked it. Florence stepped in, taking one look at my tear-streaked face and the legal papers scattered across the floor. She didn't ask what happened. She just walked past me, went into the kitchen, and started making a pot of strong black tea. "Get off the floor," she ordered gently but firmly. I picked up the papers and sat at the kitchen table. When she set a mug of hot tea in front of me, I pushed Brittany's affidavit toward her. "They're going to take everything," I whispered, my voice completely hollow. "They're going to tell a judge I'm crazy, and Brittany is going to help them." Florence put her reading glasses on and scanned the document. Her face hardened, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening into lines of pure fury. She set the paper down and looked at me. "Do you want to die, Caroline?" she asked bluntly. "No," I answered immediately. "I want to protect Finn's memory." "Exactly," Florence said, tapping the table with her index finger. "This piece of paper is a lie written by a coward who got bought. You let yourself cry for 5 more minutes over the friend you lost. And then we go to war. You do not let these vultures pick your bones clean." Florence's blunt wisdom was the exact anchor I needed to stop myself from drowning in self-doubt. But my family wasn't just attacking me in the legal system. They were launching a massive, highly coordinated public relations campaign to destroy my reputation in our community. If they could poison the well of public opinion, they knew it would be harder for me to find character witnesses to defend me in court. It started on Facebook. Chelsea, who treated social media like a competitive sport, posted a long, incredibly well-crafted status update. She included a sepia-toned photo of us as children, playing in a sprinkler. Her post read, "My heart is absolutely shattered. As many of you know, my sister Caroline recently suffered an unimaginable loss. While we have tried to surround her with love and support, grief can sometimes manifest in terrifying ways. Our family is currently going through a private agony as we try to get Caroline the intensive psychiatric intervention she so desperately needs, despite her aggressive resistance. Please keep us in your prayers as we make difficult, heartbreaking decisions to protect someone we love from herself." It was a masterclass in manipulation. It was so perfectly vague, so dripping with fake compassion, that anyone reading it would immediately assume I was suffering from a psychotic break and my heroic family was stepping in to save me. The post garnered hundreds of likes, heart reactions, and comments. People I hadn't spoken to since high school, women from my mother's country club, and even distant relatives poured into the comments section, praising Chelsea for her strength and offering prayers for my shattered mind. Not a single one of those people had called me when Finn died. Not a single one of them knew that Chelsea had been drinking champagne during his funeral. The digital smear campaign quickly bled into the real world. When I went to the local pharmacy to pick up some basic toiletries, the pharmacist, a woman who had known my family for years, gave me a look of deep, uncomfortable pity. She spoke to me in a slow, soothing voice, the kind you use to calm down a frightened toddler. I realized with a sickening jolt that she had read Chelsea's post. To the outside world, I was no longer a grieving mother. I was a mental patient waiting to be institutionalized. But the psychological warfare didn't stop at the digital border. My family needed me to act crazy to prove their case, so they decided to actively provoke me. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 1 week after the sheriff had served me the papers. I was sitting at my kitchen table, organizing a massive binder of Finn's medical bills for Graham. Florence had recently insisted on paying a security company to install a video doorbell and 2 exterior cameras on my rental house. I had argued against it, saying I couldn't accept that kind of charity, but she had fiercely overruled me. At 11:45 at night, my phone chimed with a motion alert from the front porch camera. I opened the app. In the grainy, infrared glow of the night vision, I saw Evelyn and Chelsea standing on my front porch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat perfectly still in the dark kitchen. Evelyn started pounding her fist against the heavy wooden door. It wasn't a knock, it was a rhythmic, aggressive pounding designed to startle whoever was inside. "Caroline, open the door," Evelyn yelled, her voice easily picked up by the camera's microphone. "We know you're in there hiding. You need to talk to us." I watched on the screen. I didn't move a muscle. I knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to open the door and scream at them. They wanted me to have a meltdown, throw something, or call the police in a panic. They were probably recording on their own phones, hoping to capture footage of the unstable, aggressive woman they described in their lawsuit. When I didn't answer, Chelsea stepped up to the living room window. She cupped her hands over the glass, trying to peer through the blinds. "She's completely lost it, Mom," Chelsea said loudly, ensuring her voice carried. "She's sitting in the dark like a psycho. We're going to have to call the authorities to do a wellness check if she keeps acting this erratic." Evelyn pounded on the door one last time. "You are embarrassing this family, Caroline. Sign the papers, or we will ruin you." They lingered on the porch for another 10 minutes, pacing, pointing at the house, and talking loudly about how sick I was. Finally, realizing they weren't going to get the explosive reaction they needed, they walked back to Evelyn's luxury SUV and drove away. I sat in the dark for a long time, watching the empty porch on my screen. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They had tried to break me, but all they had done was hand me the exact weapon I needed. I pressed a button on the app, downloading the crystal-clear video and audio recording of their unhinged, late-night harassment directly to my phone. I immediately emailed the file to Graham Sterling. The subject line of my email was simple: Exhibit A. The next morning, I was sitting in Graham's downtown office. The thick manila envelope containing the guardianship petition was resting on his mahogany desk. Graham looked incredibly sharp, his silver hair perfectly combed, his eyes scanning the video footage I had sent him the night before on his laptop. He closed the laptop and looked at me, a wolfish smile playing on his lips. "Caroline, your family is suffering from a very specific kind of arrogance. They believe that because they have money, the rules do not apply to them. That video is spectacular. It completely contradicts their narrative of being frightened, concerned relatives. Is it enough to stop the guardianship?" I asked, gripping the arms of the leather chair. "It's a strong piece of evidence for the defense," Graham corrected. "But to get this petition thrown out entirely, we don't just need to play defense. We need to go on the offensive. We need to prove a malicious conspiracy to defraud you." Before I could ask how we were going to do that, the phone on Graham's desk rang. He put it on speakerphone. It was his paralegal. "Mr. Sterling, the compliance officer from Memorial Pediatric Hospital just returned our inquiry," the paralegal said, her voice crackling slightly through the speaker. "You were right. There was an unauthorized access event." Graham sat up straighter. "Give me the details." According to the digital footprint, the paralegal continued, "Someone accessed Finn's Complete, Unredacted medical file 4 days ago. The system shows they bypassed standard security protocols by submitting an outdated emergency contact authorization form from 3 years ago. The name on the submission form was Chelsea. The air in the room seemed to freeze. I felt a wave of pure, unfiltered violation wash over me. Finn's medical records were sacred. They detailed his suffering, his brave fights, his painful procedures, and his ultimate decline. They contained my private, agonizing conversations with social workers and grief counselors. And Chelsea had stolen them. Why? I breathed out, horrified. Why would she do that? Ammunition, Graham said darkly. They are looking for anything they can twist. A time you missed a medication dosage by 10 minutes. A note from a nurse saying you were crying and overwhelmed. They are mining your son's death for legal leverage. He pressed a button on his phone. File a formal HIPAA violation complaint with the Federal Health Department immediately and send a cease and desist to the hospital administration. I want a certified copy of the access logs sent to my desk by tomorrow morning. Graham looked back at me. Your sister just committed a federal privacy offense to try and steal a trust fund. We now have our offensive strategy. Just as he said that, the heavy oak door to his office opened. I turned around and felt a sudden lump form in my throat. Standing in the doorway were George and Gloria, Donovan's parents, my former in-laws. They lived in Arizona and were both in their late 70s. George walked with a cane, and Gloria looked fragile, but her eyes were sharp and warm. They had flown across the country the moment Graham had called them to inform them of the guardianship petition. I stood up, and Gloria wrapped her arms around me. It was a fiercely protective embrace, completely different from the stiff, manufactured hugs my own mother gave. We are so sorry we couldn't make the funeral, Caroline, George said, his voice thick with emotion. Donovan is stuck in London with visa issues, but he sent us. We won't let those people do this to you. We know exactly what your parents are, Gloria added, pulling back to look me in the eye. Donovan warned us years ago. We are here to testify. We are here to tell the judge exactly who took care of our grandson and exactly whose money that is. Looking at George and Gloria, a profound realization hit me. My blood family was currently plotting to destroy my life, steal my money, and lock me in a psychiatric ward. But here were my ex-husband's parents, people legally tied to me by nothing but a past marriage, flying across the country to act as my human shield. Blood didn't make a family. Love, loyalty, and showing up when the world went dark, that made a family. The next 2 weeks were a blur of grueling, meticulous preparation. Graham operated his legal defense like a military general preparing for a siege. He told me that family court judges were highly unpredictable and often defaulted to protecting the vulnerable party, which meant we could not leave a single stone unturned. If my parents were bringing a knife to this fight, Graham intended to bring a tank. The first, and most humiliating, step was the psychological evaluation. Because my family had officially claimed I was mentally incompetent, Graham hired an independent, highly respected forensic psychiatrist to evaluate me. I spent 4 hours sitting in a sterile office, answering invasive questions about my sleep habits, my eating schedule, my grief, and my childhood. I had to recount every painful detail of Finn's death to a stranger to prove I wasn't having a psychotic break. It felt degrading, having to mathematically prove my sanity because my family wanted to buy a swimming pool. But when the 80-page report came back, it was a bulletproof vest. The psychiatrist concluded, unequivocally, that I was suffering from normal, expected bereavement, possessed high cognitive function, and showed absolutely zero signs of delusion, instability, or inability to manage my own affairs. Next, we built the timeline. Florence came over every evening, and together we laid out all of Finn's medical records, calendars, and my bank statements on the living room floor. We created a massive, color-coded spreadsheet documenting all 540 days of Finn's illness. Every single hospital visit, every chemotherapy appointment, every midnight emergency room run was logged. And right next to that column, we created a column for my family's involvement. The contrast was staggering, even to me. Over 18 months, I had spent roughly 4,000 hours inside the hospital. My mother had spent 20 minutes. My father had spent 0. Chelsea had spent 0. We gathered character affidavits to counter Brittany's lies. Florence wrote a beautiful, detailed statement about the countless times she saw me carrying Finn to the car, managing his complicated medication schedule, and sacrificing my own basic needs for his comfort. Finn's primary pediatric oncologist, a brilliant doctor who rarely involved himself in family disputes, was so disgusted by the subpoena for Finn's records that he voluntarily wrote a sworn affidavit praising my exceptional competence and dedication as a medical caregiver. By the night before the hearing, Graham's conference room table was covered in thick, neatly bound binders. We had the psychological evaluation clearing me of all mental defects. We had the spreadsheet proving my family's total absence during Finn's illness. We had the affidavits from Florence, the oncologist, George, and Gloria. We had the hospital access logs proving Chelsea had illegally stolen my dead son's medical files. We had the ring camera footage of Evelyn and Chelsea harassing me in the middle of the night. And we had the audio recording from the diner, where my father explicitly threatened to throw me in a psych ward if I didn't hand over the trust fund. Graham stood at the head of the conference table, looking over the arsenal we had built. Tomorrow, they are going to walk into that courtroom expecting an easy victory against a broken, hysterical woman, Graham said, packing the binders into his leather litigation briefcases. They think they're the predators in this scenario. Tomorrow, we show them they stepped into a trap. I touched the small silver locket around my neck, the one that held a tiny picture of Finn smiling in his superhero pajamas. I didn't feel broken anymore. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was surrounded by a cold, impenetrable armor of righteous anger. I was ready to burn their perfectly curated world to the ground. The county courthouse smelled of lemon floor wax, old paper, and anxious sweat. Walking down the long, fluorescent-lit corridor toward courtroom 4B, I felt a surreal sense of detachment. I was wearing a tailored navy blue suit Florence had helped me pick out from a thrift store and had professionally dry cleaned. I kept my spine straight, my eyes focused dead ahead. Graham walked on my right, carrying 2 heavy briefcases. George and Gloria walked on my left, a silent, unwavering wall of support. When we pushed through the heavy wooden double doors into the courtroom, my family was already seated at the petitioner's table. It was a masterclass in theatrical presentation. My father, Franklin, was wearing a conservative gray suit, his shoulders slumped to project the heavy burden of a concerned patriarch. My mother, Evelyn, had drastically toned down her makeup and was holding a crumpled tissue, looking perfectly fragile. Chelsea was dressed in modest, muted colors, completely unlike her usual flashy designer wardrobe. And sitting right behind them, in the first row of the gallery, was Brittany. When they saw me walk in with Donovan's parents, Franklin's jaw tightened, and Chelsea darted a nervous glance at Evelyn. They hadn't expected me to have anyone in my corner, let alone the wealthy ex-in-laws they were secretly terrified of. We took our seats at the respondents' table. The air in the room was thick with tension. A few minutes later, the bailiff announced the judge. Judge Eleanor Sterling, no relation to Graham, was a formidable woman in her early 60s with a reputation for suffering absolutely no fools. She took her seat at the high bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and looked down at the massive pile of paperwork in front of her. "We are here regarding the emergency petition for guardianship and conservatorship over Caroline," Judge Sterling announced, her voice echoing in the quiet room. The petitioners claim the respondent is suffering a catastrophic psychiatric breakdown and is an immediate danger to herself and her assets. "Mr. Vance, you represent the petitioners. You may begin." My parents' attorney, a slick, overpriced lawyer named Vance, stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket and approached the podium with a deeply somber expression. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice dripping with manufactured empathy. "This is not a case about money. This is a tragedy. We are here today because a family is desperately trying to save a mother who has lost her mind to grief. Caroline has isolated herself. She is destitute. And, as our witnesses will testify, she has exhibited terrifying, erratic behavior and expressed active desires to harm herself. We are simply asking the court to allow her loving parents to step in and manage her life so she can heal. It took everything in my power to keep my face completely blank. Graham had warned me, do not react. Do not scoff. Do not cry. Let them paint their picture. If you react emotionally, you prove their point. Vance called Evelyn to the stand first. My mother placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then, she proceeded to lie with the ease of someone discussing the weather. Evelyn dabbed her dry eyes with her tissue. Caroline she snapped when Finn died. She won't let us help her. She screams at us. She's living in filth. We love her so much, Your Honor, but she is completely out of touch with reality. We are terrified she is going to empty her bank accounts and hurt herself. Next, Vance called Brittany. Watching my former best friend walk up to the witness stand felt like swallowing broken glass. Brittany avoided looking at me. She looked directly at the judge, playing the part of the heartbroken, concerned friend perfectly. Caroline confessed to me in the hospital that she wanted to end her life. Brittany testified, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. She said she couldn't take the pain anymore. She was hysterical. Since Finn passed, she has cut off everyone who cares about her. She is not safe alone. Vance rested his initial presentation, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He had painted a picture of a broken, suicidal woman surrounded by a family desperate to save her. Judge Sterling looked down at me from the bench, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Sterling," she said to Graham. "Do you have a cross-examination?" Graham stood up slowly. He didn't approach the podium. He stood right next to me, his presence commanding the entire room. "Yes, Your Honor," Graham said, his voice ringing out like a cracked whip. "I have quite a few questions about this alleged loving family." Graham requested that Evelyn be called back to the stand. My mother walked back up, clutching her tissue, looking slightly annoyed, but still confident. Graham approached the witness box. He didn't yell. He spoke with a quiet, terrifying precision. "Mrs. Evelyn," Graham started, looking at his legal pad. "You testified a moment ago that you are deeply, intimately involved in your daughter's life, and were devastated by your grandson's illness. Is that correct?" "Yes, of course," Evelyn sniffled. "Excellent," Graham said. "Can you tell the court the name of Finn's primary pediatric oncologist?" Evelyn blinked. The tissue in her hand went still. Well, there were so many doctors. "Just the primary one," Graham pressed gently. "The man who managed your beloved grandson's care for 18 months. Dr. Smith?" Evelyn guessed, her face flushing. "It was Dr. Eris," Graham corrected loudly. "Let's try an easier one. What was the exact date of Finn's final chemotherapy treatment?" Evelyn looked at Franklin, panic flashing in her eyes. "I don't recall the exact date. It was a very stressful time." "I see." Graham walked back to our table and picked up a thick, bound document. He handed a copy to the judge and a copy to Vance. "Your Honor, I am submitting Exhibit C into evidence. This is a certified, notarized log of every visitor who entered the pediatric oncology ward for Finn over the 540 days of his illness." Graham turned back to Evelyn. "Mrs. Evelyn, can you read the total number of visits recorded next to your name over those 18 months? Evelyn stared at the paper. She didn't speak. "Please read it for the court," Judge Sterling instructed, her tone noticeably colder. "One," Evelyn whispered. "One," Graham repeated, letting the word hang in the silent courtroom. "And what is the number next to your husband's name? And your daughter Chelsea's name?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "0. "So," Graham summarized, pacing in front of the stand, "you abandoned your dying grandson for a year and a half, didn't know his doctor's name, didn't know his treatment schedule, but a week after he dies, you suddenly realize you are the only person capable of managing Caroline's life?" No further questions for this witness. Evelyn practically fled the witness stand. The slick veneer of their performance was beginning to crack. Next, Graham called my father to the stand. Franklin marched up, looking furious, his jaw set in a hard line. "Mr. Franklin," Graham began, "you filed an affidavit claiming Caroline is completely destitute and therefore requires your financial stewardship. Is it true she has no money? She is completely broke, Franklin stated confidently. She has negative balances in her checking account. And yet, Graham smiled thinly, you are spending tens of thousands of dollars on attorney fees for this guardianship petition. Why spend so much money to gain control of empty bank accounts? To protect her, Franklin snapped. Or, Graham said, his voice dropping an octave, is it to intercept the $1.5 million trust fund left by her ex-husband, which is currently clearing probate? Franklin's face went white. Vance, their lawyer, jumped out of his seat. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. The trust fund is not part of the respondent's current liquid assets. It goes entirely to motive, Your Honor, Graham fired back. Overruled, Judge Sterling said, leaning forward and staring intently at Franklin. You may answer the question, Mr. Franklin. Are you aware of the trust fund? I had heard rumors, Franklin stammered. Rumors, Graham scoffed. He picked up another document. Your Honor, I submit Exhibit D. The architectural blueprints for a $1.2 million swimming pool and renovation for Chelsea's marital home. Blueprints that were conveniently sitting on the table the day this family tried to force Caroline to sign a power of attorney. The judge looked at the blueprints, then looked at Franklin with a gaze that could freeze water. Mr. Franklin, Graham said softly, leaning into the microphone. Is your real estate business currently facing insolvency? Franklin didn't answer. He looked at Vance for help, but Vance was furiously flipping through his own files, realizing he had been ambushed. I'll take your silence as a yes, Graham said. No further questions. Graham wasn't finished. He had successfully dismantled their narrative of being concerned family members, but he still needed to destroy the core of their legal argument, that I was insane and dangerous. Your Honor, Graham said, turning his attention to the bench. The petitioners claim Caroline is unstable and aggressive. I would like to submit Exhibit E, an independent psychological evaluation conducted just 3 days ago by Dr. Harrison Keller, a court-approved forensic psychiatrist. Judge Sterling took the thick report from the bailiff. She scanned the executive summary. Dr. Keller concludes, Graham read aloud, that the respondent is completely lucid, highly intelligent, and shows absolutely zero signs of psychiatric distress beyond normal, expected bereavement. In fact, Dr. Keller notes she possesses remarkable emotional resilience. These evaluations can be manipulated. Vance protested weakly from his table. If opposing counsel prefers raw, unmanipulated evidence, Graham countered smoothly, I would like to submit Exhibit F and G, audio and video recordings that will clarify exactly who in this family is unstable, aggressive, and an immediate danger. Graham connected his laptop to the courtroom's audio-visual system. A large screen descended from the ceiling. First, he played the audio recording from the diner. The pristine, digital sound of my father's voice filled the silent courtroom. Listen to me, you unstable bitch. You are going to give us control of that trust, one way or another. We will take your dignity, we will take your freedom, and we will take everything from you. You will end up locked in a psych ward, and I will be signing the checks anyway. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible. Even Vance, my parents' lawyer, physically recoiled, dropping his pen onto his desk. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. Franklin stared blankly at the table, looking like a man who had just watched his own execution. Before they could recover, Graham played the video. The Ring camera footage lit up the screen. It showed Evelyn and Chelsea standing on my porch at midnight, pounding on the door like feral animals, screaming insults, and threatening to call the authorities to ruin me if I didn't sign the papers. Your Honor, Graham said, shutting off the screen, leaving the harsh reality of their actions hanging in the air. What we have here is not a family trying to save a grieving mother. We have a coordinated, malicious, and criminal conspiracy to defraud a grieving mother out of a $1.5 million trust fund to pay off the father's business debts and fund the sister's lavish lifestyle. Graham reached into his final briefcase. And finally, Your Honor, I submit Exhibit H. A formal complaint filed with the Federal Health Department. The hospital system logs prove that Chelsea used outdated authorization forms to illegally access a deceased minor's medical records to find ammunition for this fraudulent petition. A federal HIPAA violation. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. Judge Sterling took off her glasses. She didn't look at the evidence anymore. She looked directly at my parents. Her face was a mask of absolute, unadulterated disgust. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Do you have any further evidence to present, or would you prefer to withdraw this petition before I hold your clients in contempt of court?" Vance stood up, his face pale and sweating. "The petitioners, withdraw the petition, Your Honor." "No," Judge Sterling snapped. "I am not allowing you to simply withdraw, so you can refile in another jurisdiction. I am dismissing this petition with extreme prejudice. It is baseless, it is malicious, and it is frankly one of the most morally reprehensible abuses of the family court system I have seen in my 20 years on the bench." The judge struck her gavel, but she wasn't done. Furthermore, she continued, her voice rising in volume. "I am granting the respondent's countermotion for an immediate, permanent restraining order. Mr. Franklin, Mrs. Evelyn, and Ms. Chelsea, you are forbidden from coming within 1,000 feet of Caroline, her residence, or her place of employment. If you attempt to contact her regarding this trust fund again, you will be arrested." Chelsea let out a choked sob, realizing her luxury life was evaporating before her eyes. And lastly, Judge Sterling glared at Brittany in the gallery, then back to my parents. "I am ordering the court clerk to forward the transcripts of today's testimony, along with these audio recordings and hospital access logs, to the district attorney's office. I strongly recommend an immediate criminal investigation into perjury, extortion, and federal privacy violations. We are adjourned." The bang of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. It was over. The checkmate was complete. My parents didn't look at me as they hastily packed their bags. They looked terrified, diminished, and entirely broken. As they practically ran out of the courtroom to avoid the bailiff, George and Gloria wrapped their arms around me. Graham put a hand on my shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. "You did it, Caroline. You protected him." For the first time since the day Finn died, I let myself cry. Not tears of paralyzing grief, but tears of absolute, overwhelming relief. I had walked into the lion's den, and I had burned it to the ground. 1 year later, the ashes of my former family's life had settled permanently. The fallout from the courtroom checkmate was swift and utterly merciless. Because court records are public, the transcripts of the hearing leaked. Mark, Chelsea's wealthy fiancé, called off the wedding less than 48 hours after the judge dismissed the guardianship petition. His family's corporate law firm wanted absolutely nothing to do with the federal HIPAA violation scandal. Without Mark's money to prop them up, Franklin's real estate development company officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 3 months later. They lost the sprawling suburban house. They lost the luxury cars. They were currently renting a small apartment 2 towns over, drowning in legal fees as they fought the district attorney's perjury charges. As for Brittany, her sworn affidavit claiming I was suicidal backfired spectacularly. When Mark's law firm found out she had committed perjury to try and steal a trust fund, they rescinded her job offer. Shortly after, her current HR company fired her for ethical violations. I felt absolutely zero pity for any of them. They had dug their own graves, and I simply refused to throw them a rope. I, on the other hand, had found a way to breathe again. Once the trust fund officially cleared probate and the $1.5 million was transferred to my control, I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't buy a sports car. I took Graham's advice and established a formalized nonprofit foundation. On a bright, crisp Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year and 1 month after Finn's funeral, I stood in the lobby of Memorial Pediatric Hospital. Above the heavy glass doors leading into the oncology ward, a massive, brushed steel plaque had been installed. It read, "The Finn Sterling Legacy Wing, dedicated to providing world-class care and financial support for families fighting rare pediatric blood disorders." I had used a massive portion of the trust to fund the renovation of the ward, buy state-of-the-art monitoring equipment, and establish an endowment that paid the parking fees and cafeteria tabs for low-income parents sleeping in those terrible vinyl reclining chairs. Florence stood on my right side, wearing her best Sunday dress. George and Gloria stood on my left, having flown in from Arizona for the dedication ceremony. Graham was there too, chatting amicably with the hospital administrator. I looked at the small group of people surrounding me. They weren't bound to me by genetics or a shared last name. They were bound to me by loyalty, by shared grief, and by the undeniable truth that they had stood in the fire with me when everyone else ran away. This was my family. My real family. After the dedication, I drove alone to the cemetery. The grass had grown over Finn's grave, vibrant and green in the spring sunlight. I sat down on the ground, crossing my legs, and traced the letters of his name carved into the granite headstone. I didn't feel the suffocating emptiness anymore. The cold wind had been replaced by a gentle breeze. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, plastic action figure. It was the superhero Finn used to hold during his chemotherapy sessions. I placed it carefully on top of the headstone. "We did it, buddy," I whispered, the sunlight warming my face. "Your legacy is safe. It's helping other kids fight just like you did." I kept my promise. I sat there for a long time, listening to the birds chirping in the trees, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over my soul. The nightmare was finally over. The monsters had been slain. And I was still standing. I completely cut them off, leaving them to face bankruptcy, public humiliation, and perjury charges alone. They beg for forgiveness now, sending letters claiming we are blood and that they made a mistake out of grief. But I burn the letters without reading them. I feel nothing for them. Sometimes I wonder if I was too ruthless in destroying them. Am I wrong? Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please hit that button and let me know your verdict in the comments below. Was Caroline too harsh, or did her family get exactly what they deserved? Drop your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next story.